Merry met, virtual traveller, and welcome to Stories of the Sun, a limited episode podcast created as a companion to the book Stories of the Sun, published by the History Press and written by me, Dawn Nelson, an author and professional storyteller. The idea for this book began when I challenged myself to get up once a month over the year to watch the sunrise in order to reconnect with the sun and its stories. Throughout the 8 episodes, I will include some snippets of audio that I recorded especially for this podcast. This episode explores the dark half, the importance of rest and hunkering down and hibernating. Grab yourself a cuppa, find a comfy spot, and come with me now to my sit spot on the hill.
Just in the distance, I can hear a green woodpecker, a yaffle, laughing at me. The human sounds of the day are starting to cover the palimpsest of birdsong. You can probably hear the cars. It's another plane. It's 7:15. It's pretty much full daylight now. But some of the cars still have the headlights on. Maybe the sensors still think they're needed down in the valley. And I can see the really bright edge of the sun now coming up from behind that bank of clouds. It's coming up into a clear sky, so should be a pretty lovely sunrise. Here she is. When the sun does start to rise, it comes up relatively quickly. So that was in about 40 seconds. Went from me not being able to see her to her now I'm not able to look at that part of the sky anymore. I'm just going to move along slightly so I can look at her from an angle rather than directly on, because we all know you should not look directly at the sun. Icarus will tell you the power of the sun, I'm sure. So will Phaeton. And many, many others. Here she is. She's almost completely above that cloud now. That's taken maybe less than a minute. It's absolutely glorious. This morning the sun is like the sort of sun that you drew when you were little. Big, round, yellow sun, and then the shards of light coming off it. It's warming my bones. And I tell you what, after sitting in this frosty grass, it is most welcome. And yes, I did say frosty grass.
In the March chapter of the book, I discuss circadian rhythms and how our instincts take their cues from the sun. The sun literally tells us when to sleep and when to wake up. The disappearance and appearance of natural light, which comes from the sun, triggers neurons in our brain which tell us whether we should be asleep or awake. Unsurprisingly, synthetic light disrupts this process. The rest of the natural world tends to abide by these rhythms of light and dark. In fact, some animals even hibernate. It's the process of retreating into a dormant state for long periods of time without waking to eat or drink. Or go into a torpor, which is a slightly less extreme version of the hibernation. It means that they go into a state of extended energy saving, but they can still wake up in order to eat and drink. However, they may be trying to live by the Earth's rhythms, but unsurprisingly, we're interfering with that. Robins and blackbirds are some of the most obvious examples, as they are some of the birds in the UK with the most light-sensitive eyes, and they are kept awake by street lamps and neon signs. They continue to sing way into the night, wasting valuable energy and changing the very fundamental soundscapes of where we live, which in turn affects our sense of belonging as well. I talk more about this in November's chapter, but suffice to say, I think we all need to turn the lights off occasionally. I'm not suggesting we plunge emergency theatres into dark and expect surgeons to work in the pitch black. That would be ridiculous. And there are some advances we have made which require synthetic lights, which are truly incredible and should not be simply reversed. However, we all need a dark half. And there is a dark half in everything. In the woods, Baba Yaga dwells with her chicken-legged hut. In the hedgerows, the dark Irish lunantishae hide within the blackthorn, happy to give you creative inspiration in exchange for just a few years of your life. In the seas dwell the sirens we hear of from Greek myths that will wreck your ships, and in the lakes lie the Bacca Houst of Scandinavia or the water horses of Scotland, who will eat small children should they stray too close to the shore. In story, the dark places are represented in underworlds, crossing places and liminal spaces. They are sometimes places long cut off from the light, places of danger or places where nothing good will occur. Social constructs reinforce this. The need to continue being productive, continue with the routine, and fill the space with that synthetic light, convince ourselves that we do not need the dark and that in fact it hinders us. But if you read, listen to and tell stories, well then you will know that that is not so. Darkness is a very necessary place, and if we play by the rules of that space and do not lose ourselves within it, well then they can offer us valuable sanctuary. So what are those rules? Well, in the main, be sure of yourself and do not look back. Behave with reverence within the space, and only take what you need and you will emerge from the dark wiser and stronger. Often, modern rhythms of work do not always allow a total immersion in darkness in order to recharge. But in one way or another, there is a time where we need to hunker down, and we need to acknowledge that in order to remain healthy, balanced human beings, we need that rest. Perhaps it means we need to make a conscious decision to do this and make space for it in our lives. That's easier said than done, I know. And I'm not suggesting you take yourself off to a sensory deprivation tank and spend a ludicrous amount of money just to get some peace and quiet, although that's tempting. What I am talking about is paying attention to the rhythms of nature. The light and the dark, the day and the night, the arc of the sun and the arrival of the moon. After all, that's what this whole podcast and indeed book has been about. Connecting with the earth, nature, heritage and the landscape through our largest star, the sun. By observing its rhythms, showing up and being present for it, we can hope to find our own way back to the being that knows when to rest, like bear, dormouse, badger, bat, hedgehog and so many others. So how do we start to do this? Watch a sunrise, bake bread, pickle, preserve, walk the seasons, listen to stories of the sun gods and crepuscular hags, and in short, read my book. And if you have read Stories of the Sun, I would love to know what you thought. And if you have time to leave a review, either wherever you bought the book or via social media, well then I would be very grateful. Reviews help not only to raise the awareness of the book, but also support my work with folklore and story, helping it to reach more people. I'll be back next week with one final episode, Below the Horizon, looking at what didn't quite make it into the book. Don't forget that by subscribing as a paid subscriber to my Substack, Ceridwen's Cauldron, you will have access to an extra dose of wild storytelling to your inbox, plus podcast extras for both this podcast and for Stories from Lore, my other podcast. Podcast extras for Stories of the Sun include a full uninterrupted version of the audio for the sunrise featured in this podcast, spoken word poetry, how to make the perfect hot chocolate, a downloadable sun celebration sheet, how to eat with the seasons, how to make a swallow thaumatrope, and coming soon, the story of Baba Yaga and the Greek myth of Phaeton and Cygnus. Just hop on over to the Substack site and search for Ceridwen's Cauldron, or use the link in the show notes. You can upgrade to paid for just £5 a month. Thanks for joining me for this episode. You can find me on Instagram as @dd_storyteller, on Facebook as DD Storyteller, and via Substack as Ceridwen's Cauldron. I hope to see you there, as I'd love to tell you another story. I'll see you next time. Toodle pip.